All right, welcome back. A little mini lesson about cells. We're going to talk about who discovered cells, what a cell is, the cell theory, and then we're going to review slash talk about the parts of the cell. There will be more videos in the future that are more detailed about specifically the cell membrane. We're going to talk more specifically about certain parts of the cell. So this part of the lesson is what is a cell and who discovered cells? So you may know, or you may be like, I have no idea. Some people might be thinking a cell is in your body, it's small. Some people might be thinking a prison cell. So this is actually a microscope picture of cells, right? In cork. Think of a wine bottle and the cork on the top, right? Think of a cork bulletin board when you hang things up on it. So this guy, Robert Hooke, took a piece of cork, looked at it under the microscope, and thought, whoa, what is that? There's all these little, he called them cells. Guess why? Because he thought they looked like prison cells, which they kind of do. So he looked at this and thought, I wonder what those are, right? And cork actually comes from a tree. So even though it is dead and the inside of the cells are, completely non-existent at this point, the cell wall or the outside part of the cell is preserved, and you're able to see that in cork. So he thought, well, maybe this is in all living things, right? And it turns out that they are. So the cell theory, notice it's a theory, not a law, because it's pretty hard to test this. It's something that we have an overwhelming amount of evidence for, but it is slightly difficult to test. Why? Because it's all. All organisms are made of cells. Okay, well, we haven't found an organism that's not made of cells yet. Organisms can be made of one cell, called unicellular or single-celled, right? Or they could be made of lots of cells, multicellular, which is what a human is. Whereas a bacteria is a single-celled organism or a unicellular organism. So we haven't found anything yet that's not made of cells, but hey, could be out there. Second part of the cell theory is that the cell is the smallest unit of life. Yes, there are things inside a cell. Yes, there are things even smaller than that, right? Atoms, there's things smaller than atoms. Those things are not considered a unit of life, right? A cell can function on its own by itself as a living organism. Atoms cannot do that, right? Certain inside parts of the cell cannot function by themselves. They need other parts of the cell in order to work, right? So the cell is the smallest unit of life. And then last part here, all cells arise from other cells. Seems plausible, right? Cells reproduce. Think about your skin. The top layer of your skin cell are all dead, right? They used to be the bottom layer. But as your cells divided and pushed those cells to the top, right, you were able to shed off some of your skin and have nice fresh skin. So all cells arise from other cells. Also, so far, true, right? The thing is, we don't know where the first cell came from. If all cells arise from other cells, where did the first one come from? That one's a little harder. So that's really all I want to say about the cell theory. Because then the rest of this was something that I used to do in my brick and mortar classroom that we're not going to do. Now we're going to go into parts of the cell. Again, remember to pause and take notes as needed. So our objectives, I actually put them in forms of questions this time so that we should be able to answer these questions by the end. What are the main parts of a cell and how do cells differ? So, parts of a cell. Animal and plant. That means these things are found in both animal cells and plant cells. Going to become important. The nucleus, right? This is often thought of as the brain of the cell, the center of the cell, the control center of the cell. You may have heard any kind of version of that. It is the center of the cell, right? Not the actual center, but the center in terms of what's happening. And it contains DNA, right? This is incredibly important, and it has a membrane, right? The nucleus has its own membrane around it, which actually makes entering and exiting the nucleus very controlled, right? You don't want anything just popping in your nucleus and destroying your DNA because then you wouldn't exist. So there is sort of a gate around the nucleus protecting it from things that might destroy your DNA, which a lot of things destroy your DNA, including the sunlight. So what can you do? Other things that are in both plants and animals are your mitochondria. This is your major source for energy in a cell. It creates something called ATP. We're going to have a whole lesson just on the mitochondria. Ribosome creates proteins, right? It creates enzymes. It creates your hair. It creates your skin. Again, we're going to have a whole lesson on what the ribosome does. It's very complicated. The mitochondria looks a little weird. It has a lot of membranes, right? It has this inner matrix, inner membrane, outer membrane. It looks like this. This is how it's always represented. Ribosomes kind of look like a hamburger, right? There's a little space in between. There's a big and a small subunit. The cell membrane is in plants and animals and bacteria. Oh, bacteria. Guess what? Bacteria also have ribosomes. They don't have a mitochondria, though, and they don't have a nucleus. But they do have ribosomes, and they have a cell membrane. Guess what? Every cell has a cell membrane because that's what holds everything together and makes it a cell, right? This surrounds a cell and controls what enters and exits the cell. I like to think of the cell membrane as the bouncer to the club, right? If the cell was a very popular club, the cell membrane acts as the bouncer. Who may enter and who is not entering and who's exiting, right? Is somebody being crazy inside and they need to exit? Is somebody waiting to get in and they need to be let in, right? So the cell membrane controls that traffic. We're going to have a whole lesson just on the cell membrane. It is this phospholipid bilayer, which we'll talk about. It kind of looks like sperm cells together, but it's not the same thing. It's not made of sperm cells, in case you thought that. There are proteins inside the membrane, right? There are carbohydrates involved here that help signal. There's a lot of stuff going on in the membrane, which we're not going to talk about right now. Plants have some special stuff that we don't have. Chloroplasts. That is the green stuff in the plant that converts sunlight into sugar, right? That process is known as photosynthesis for those of you with a strong science background. We're going to have a whole lesson on the chloroplast. Have no fear. Vacuoles are these huge water containers, basically. They hold water for the plant, right? The reason this is important in plants is because plants actually need to have an excess amount of water inside of them so that they do not wilt, right? That water helps provide their structure so they can stand up. So humans also have vacuoles, but we have really tiny ones because we don't need to store that much water in each cell. Whereas plants need to store water to keep the structure of their cells intact so that they can stand up. Plants also have a cell wall. Some bacteria have a cell wall as well. That is something that some bacteria have. This is the outside rigid layer that helps plants maintain their structure, right? The vacuole of water helps push the rest of the cell out so that it meets the cell wall and keeps the plant cells nice and full and able to stand. The cell wall has one of my favorite science words ever, the plasmodesmata. These are holes in the cell wall that allow the plant cells to communicate with each other. The plasmodesmata. So there are other parts of the cell. We're not going to label cells right now, but there are other parts of the cell that you may see or hear about, right? The Golgi apparatus, the endoplasmic reticulum, etc. Peroxisome. So we will talk about some of these other structures later. I would definitely recommend that you print out some cells. I'll include blank ones. And I would actually do this. Label your cells and color them, right? I would print out a plant and an animal cell. Blank, black and white. And I would color all of these things in them, and I would make a key. I will upload this onto Canvas and include blank cells that you could print out and color. so that you can see the similarities and practice labeling and coloring. Right? If you would prefer to just print out already colored and labeled cells and just study them, that's fine. That's up to you. But the acts of actually labeling and coloring may help you remember some of these structures and what they do. All right, so that has been our mini lesson on parts of the cell.